Welcome to episode 13 of the Hike Files podcast. I'm your host, Kurt Zitzelman. What's going on? I saw a headline this week that made me think of a few situations that I've seen personally that happen far more often than they should. So we're going to talk about fire safety and a lot about common sense. The article I saw was titled, "Steamboat Hikers Find Abandoned Burning Campfire." I just don't understand how anybody could do that. I will leave a link to this story in the show notes if you want to go ahead and read that. What it basically talks about, though, is coming across abandoned campfires. People have packed up and left their fire burning. Now, it doesn't matter if you're backpacking and you've made a campsite, or if you've come across a established campsite that you're using like a pre-made fire ring, or you're car camping and you're using a metal fire ring. It doesn't matter. Please, please, please do not walk away from your fire and leave it burning. I've seen it state park camping where people have had a huge fire. Like, they get up in the morning and they light a fire and then they leave to go hiking or kayaking, or they're running into town to pick up supplies, but they just get in their car and they drive away and they leave their fire burning in the metal fire ring. I have seen rangers come in, watch the fire, wait for the people to come back, give them a citation, most likely a fine, and then tell them to pack up their stuff and get out. It can cause a huge fire. It can be massively destructive. When you're car camping, you're probably near civilization of some kind. There's probably houses and anything else. There's people who are camping near you. You're putting them at danger. You're putting people's homes and livelihoods in danger. When you're backpacking, it's even worse because you're probably further from civilization, but that makes it that much harder to get that fire out. And it takes time for people to realize that it's on fire. If you're lucky, somebody catches it early, but that's not usually the case. I believe it was 2019. A group of us went down to Dolly Sods on Thanksgiving weekend to do a little backpacking trip. On our second day, we decided to change our planned course and take a completely different trail. And luckily we did. As we were kind of crossing the ridge and heading over to the front side, the front side of Dolly Sods. And we came around a corner. We hadn't seen anybody really all day, maybe one or two people. I mean, because it was a holiday weekend, we didn't expect to. But we came around a corner and we could smell campfire. We thought, we're going to see somebody. Well, as we get to this campsite, there's nobody in it. And judging by the looks of the fire, they had piled up as much wood as they could find. They piled it up in the fire pit, on top of the fire pit, over the fire pit, around the fire pit. They just had a bonfire. It was just a massive fire, it looks like. And who knows how long it was burning for. They may have had it going all night. But they just packed up their stuff and walked away and left it burning. And it was burning pretty good when we got there. Now, luckily, Dragon had a stuff sack that I think the lid had broken on it. And he didn't really like it. And he was just going to get rid of it when he got home anyway. So he had that empty in his backpack. So we grabbed that. It was kind of water resistant, so it would hold water. And it was just a large puddle down the trail. We just were taking turns, like running down, scooping up like probably 2 or 3 liters of water at a time. It was a pretty decent sized stuff sack. Running over, put the fire out while somebody else was like trying to like kick the embers into the fire pit. The roots, it was all pine trees around it. The roots were scorched and still burning and glowing red. So we're trying to put that out. It was just, the water was evaporating as soon as it hit the rocks. It was a hot fire. And it took us maybe, 10 or 15 minutes to put that fire out to a point where we were comfortable walking away from it. It was really bad. I like that article says, I don't understand how somebody could do that. How could you have a fire burning, pack up your stuff, and just walk away from it? In the woods. The same stuff that you used to start the fire is all around you. You're in the middle of the woods and you're going to walk away from a fire? I really try, especially the older I get, to not be critical of people, but those people shouldn't be out in the woods. They really shouldn't be. They should have to take classes or something. I don't know. I'm not sure what is going on in people's minds. Like, it's just going to burn out. I mean, it's surrounded by fuel. All it takes is a little wind. I mean, sure, it's, there was a little bit of snow on the ground, and I think there was weather in the forecast. But that doesn't mean the hot enough fire is going to go out. And because those roots were on fire, that's an even bigger problem. So I see this on YouTube a lot, where people make ground fires, where they'll go to a spot, they'll camp. Instead of making a fire pit or something similar, they will just kind of move the surface, like clear the dirt, the duff, and the leaves and sticks and stuff away. Leave a dirt patch and then have a fire right on the dirt. Now, if you know the kind of trees that you're around, and you're confident that there's not a lot of roots under you, but if you're under a tree, there's probably going to be roots, and you're not going to have a really big fire, in an emergency, that would work. Anytime I build a fire pit, though, I always use some flat rocks I put down as a base, so I'm burning on those rocks, not directly on the ground. And the reason for that is maybe it's like a science class thing where people think that once you start a fire, the heat just goes up, but the heat does radiate down as well. If you're burning on top of roots, depending on the kind of tree, especially if they're conifers, pine trees and things like that have a lot of sap and resin in them, they are highly flammable. And as you have the fire on top of them, they dry out, they become more flammable, they will ignite and smolder underground. They're not getting as much air as they should to have a full-on fire, but they will smolder, and that will spread out through the root system, and you could eventually start a forest fire from underneath. And then once it gets into the trees, and those are really hard to detect, because that fire it will burn inside the tree, from the inside out. So by the time you know there's a fire, those trees are already thoroughly burned. Those are probably some of the worst kind of forest fires I can start. It's very similar to what happens with lightning strikes. With a lightning strike, very rarely does the strike itself just catch a tree on fire. It hits the ground and it burns the trees and the roots from the inside. And then they just smolder and they get hotter and hotter and then burst into flames. So for myself, I take a lot of things into consideration before I'll even light a fire. Well, the first thing I pay attention to is, are there any known scheduled burn bans in the area? In Pennsylvania, we do it from March till May. There's a spring burn ban. Just because of the elements at that time of year. All the snow's melted. We've got a lot of downed branches and trees from the winter. All the leaves in the fall are on the ground. There's no new growth yet, so it can be extremely windy even in the forest, and it's prime conditions to start a forest fire. So they put a ban on it. If you're backpacking and you think you're going to want a fire at camp, maybe to cook or something like that, most state forests will allow you to register for a permit. They don't charge you for it, but they just want to know who you are, where you're going to be, when you're going to have that fire. And that way, if there's a problem, you're taking responsibility for it by getting that permit. They won't always give it to you, though, depending on the situations. So that's one thing I think about. Outside of that, though, I take the weather into consideration anyway. Has it been dry? Have we had a lot of rain? Is it going to be windy? Things like that. If it's in a drought, I won't have a fire. If it seems like it's going to be really windy and the wind is getting down into the forest, then I probably won't have a fire. I just don't want those embers and stuff like that blowing around and causing a problem. Personally, for me, do I even need the fire? Am I having it just for ambiance, for something to do? I usually have a stove with me anyway, so I don't really need it for cooking. But if in the winter, sometimes I like to do it just so I don't, if I don't bring a stove and I'm going to use the fire to cook, heat up my water, stay warm. You're in camp longer. It's something to do. I'm not saying that, having a campfire is bad. It's just being responsible. Doing it is very, very important. When I was in Arizona on the Arizona Trail, I did that on Christmas Eve. I really wanted to have a fire. It was going to be cold. Okay, that's fine, whatever. I was prepared for that. But it was, the skies out there you can see so many stars. So I want to have the fire and just kind of sit there and look at the stars. And it's kind of the thing that I've always pictured, like camping in, that's high desert up there, but camping out in the west in a desert-like environment with a little campfire looking at the stars. But it was really windy. The wind really picked up. So I decided I'm not going to have the fire. Even in the morning when I got up and it was, the wind had died down, I wasn't going to be at camp long enough, and there was no water nearby to put it out when I was done. So the water I had, I needed for drinking, wasn't going to waste on the fire. So I just avoided that altogether. And then that's the next thing I think about. Can I easily put the fire out? Is there a water source nearby? Can I get water to put the fire out if I have to? And then if I am going to have a fire, I always look at what's around. How low are the branches over the fire pit? How close are the trees? What kind of trees are they? What's the undergrowth situation like? What's the leaf? How leafy is the ground around it? It's like there's a lot of stuff that can spark up a fire. And then I'll clear the area accordingly. And like I said, if I build a fire pit, I will put stones down on the bottom and build around those stones so that there's a base to lessen. It's not 100%, but it lessens the likelihood of that fire going down into the root system and catching those trees on fire. One thing you do need to watch for, though, when you're building a fire pit, if you're near a stream or a creek, a river, a pond, and you're building a fire pit out of stone, don't take the stones out of the water and build the fire pit. Stone, although it is very solid, will absorb water. You can get water that will seep into the stone. And if you build your fire pit out of that water gets hot, it turns to steam. It's got nowhere to go. It can explode those rocks. That is an actual thing. I've seen it happen. Trust me, you do not want to get hit with flaming hot, steam heated, exploded rocks, or what comes out of the fire when that happens. You also don't need a stone to explode for that to happen. Dragon and I had a fire right after they moved into their new home. A section of the state forest is up behind them. We went up there. We did some camping. We made a small fire pit. It was a small fire. It was nothing crazy. And one of the pieces of wood on the very bottom exploded. And it threw everything on top of it right out of the fire. It was crazy. I've never seen that happen. Dragon got hit with some of the debris. He was okay. But we were just like looking around like, what just happened? We put all the embers out, and that was in the fall. So everything was dry. That could have been really bad. If we had walked away from that and we were, let's go see where this trail goes, or there's a lake not far from there. Let's walk up to the lake. If we would have done that and left that fire burning, then that would have happened. There's houses right by there. We could have caused a lot of damage. Luckily, we were just sitting there hanging out by the fire. And then finally, when you're done with your fire, if you're going to have a fire in the morning, that's fantastic. Make sure you got a way to put it out. Don't just assume, it's died down. It'll be fine. It'll go out on its own. Grab some water. Make sure it's out. In the winter, I use snow. You can use dirt. Just make sure it's out and make sure it's cool. Like if you can't touch the soil, if you can't touch it, it's too hot. Like don't just reach your hand in there, but put your hand over it, see if it's warm, see if it's hot. Make sure that fire's out. That way, your peace of mind, that fire's out. I know some people don't like to do that in the morning because they think, well, I'm going to have a fire later and now it's all wet. That water will evaporate. It will dry out. You're going to put new wood on top of it, start a fire. It'll dry out real quick, even if it's still damp. You'll be fine. Those fire pits get rained on all the time, and you can still start a fire. Unless you're actively dumping water on it while you're trying to light the fire, you're going to be okay. So that's everything I got to talk about fires for right now. So I'm interested to know if you've come across a situation where you're out hiking and there's an empty campsite and a fire burning. Were you able to put it out? Did you have to call emergency services, or how did that work out for you? Curious to know. Send me an email at hike.files@gmail.com. Let me know your story. And that's going to do it for this week. Thanks for listening. And I will talk to you in episode 14 of the Hike Files podcast.